Development Authority that are with us. You'll remember back in 2019, we did a resolution entering an agreement with the Development Authority of the North Country to provide a survey of broadband high-speed internet conditions in Lewis County. There's two elements. There was the market survey, where we were going to talk to people in the community, figure out what type of speeds they had now, what were they willing to pay, and were they satisfied with their service, among other things. And then there was the technical infrastructure aspect, where we were going to physically drive down every road in Lewis County and take a physical inventory of all the high-speed internet providers in the county. So that work has been completed, managed by Dank and by our planning department. We hired a contractor, ECC, to do that work. And so we have Lori Marr with Dank, who's going to kick off the first half of the presentation, the market survey. Then Dave Wolf is going to talk about the infrastructure survey. And then Carl Ferrone, the new executive director, is with us this afternoon. And together we can talk about kind of what happens next and how we want to use this information to close the gap in this infrastructure in Lewis County. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lori. And you all have a copy of this report in your email.
Thanks, Ryan. You just actually took care of what I was going to say in the first couple of slides. So
sorry.
Everybody knows about our two-pronged approach. I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that this definitely is a partnership between Lewis County and the Development Authority. Sometimes in the media coverage, it's just all about Dank, and it definitely was not. It was about us working very closely with Lewis County. And as Ryan talked about, there was it was a two-pronged approach. So the first part, this was ECC, the contractor. This is their fancy name for it. Broadband Aggregation and Adoption Toolset. They call it the BAT program. I call it the survey part of the project. It's just much easier. So I'm going to talk about the survey part of the project, and then Dave is going to talk about the inventory part of the project. So first of all, what did we do? So the survey part of the project, it was a web-based survey of residents, businesses, and talked about different situations. But the most important part was an ECC put together the survey with our input, both the counties and the development authorities. And I want to point out before we go any further, this wonderful graphic right here that we used in all of the promotional materials. This was done by Jenna Krager of the Lewis County Economic Development Department. And I can't say enough about Jenna's involvement, Brittany Davis's involvement, and Cassandra Buell's involvement. They were enthusiastic, they were energetic, they came up with all sorts of ideas, because our part of this project, of the actual grunt work of the project, was to drive people to the website to do the surveys. How are we going to promote the survey and push the survey and get people to do it? So these guys would put their heads together and come up with ideas. The thing that was a little different about this, sure, ECC Technologies is experienced in doing these projects, but they had never done one with anybody during COVID times. So all of the things that previous counties had done before to promote the survey were off the table. Go to your local library and use a computer there. Have a Dropbox in a municipal office. All those things were not available to us. Have the kids take home a paper from school. No. We couldn't do any of that. So we had to be really creative. So this gives you an idea to list up there some of the things that we did. We did do some paid advertising on the Moose radio station and in the Loudville Republican and on Lincoln Lewis County. We used Jenna's design there as the basis for flyers and ads that we ran in various publications. We drove around. I know I personally did it. I think Brittany and Jenna did. Drove around and I laminated some flyers and I nailed them on telephone poles and at four corners in some of the smaller communities in the county just to try to spread the word. And then I don't know who it was between Cassandra, waiting in line for COVID tests. Because at the time, we were doing the surveys here in November, December, January. It was before vaccinations, which we're passing out vaccine sites now. But that was a great idea. And it worked. We had a lot of support from organizations in the county, the Lewis County Chamber, Cooperative Extension, lots of other organizations were willing to put it out to their memberships and really push it. So some people, I want to cover this because some people say, well, isn't that kind of dumb that you had an online survey and how would people who didn't have any internet access do the survey? Well, that's where we had to be creative. So we had the planning department's phone number in all the ads and on all of the materials. You could call the planning department and Cassie, one of her staff, would do the survey for you over the phone. We did have, the Lowville Library, when they were open, some of the little libraries were open for a while. We did promote that. And we also had a 2-page paper survey that Cassie's office could send out to people if they needed a paper copy, and they would come back to her office, and then her staff would enter them into the system. So we do feel that we got good participation and good response. Also used social media. The economic development team there was really good at using social media to promote this as well. So the first preference was to have people do it from their home computer. And the reason for that is because an important part of the project that we'll talk about in a minute is called the speed test. We wanted to know how fast people were able to get data at their home and how fast they were able to send it out. Like if you have to send photos to somebody or if you have to get a video from someone. It's called a speed test. Okay, so what were the responses? Now you're all gonna it's gonna be hard to see some of these maps with all the little dots on them. I believe Ryan's gonna, give you all a copy of this report. There's two reports.
We did electronic copies because we tried to print them and it was just really hard to see, printed. So it's PDF and we can, if you guys ever want to see any of the maps, we can pull them on too, so.
So the goal was to try to get, ECC likes to see a 5% response rate in a county when they do a project like this. Well, the response rate here was 9 to 10%. We got 1,352 total responses, which was outstanding. But it speaks to the passion and the urgency around this issue in the county. I know that Cassie got some phone calls. I know that I got some phone calls on nights in December when I was Christmas shopping of people that just wanted to talk about how horrible their conditions were and how horrible this one was or that one was, and could we come to their house and fix it? And so there is a lot of passion around this, which is great to see. It was great to see the participation. 91% of the responses were residential in nature, and about 9% were from businesses. And so of that number, 23% reported that they had no access to broadband or that they only had access via DSL or dial-up, which is not considered broadband because it's so slow. If you combine that, people who said they had no access or that they only had access through satellite or a cellular hotspot, that's 49%. That's almost half of the people who responded, are what we would call underserved. And interestingly, the feedback section, which you will see in the electronic version of the report, over 460 people took the time to write comments, and some people wrote a lot. Some people just wrote brief things, but some people wrote a lot. But it's interesting because you can see how people feel, and sometimes you'll see a lot of comments from a certain area, so it can help you think about areas that you might want to concentrate on. So then people were asked this is the type of internet access that they had. So this one over here is no access. The tall blue one is cable. And then the green one, this is a cellular hotspot. The little orange one, that's dial-up, what we would probably call old-fashioned connection now. And then next to that, the coral is DSL. And then this little purple one is fiber optic cable. And then the dark blue is satellite. And then the green is wireless. but not cellular. And then all those responses are mapped on this map. So you can see who said what, where, and where people reported having that kind of access. Doesn't want to move again. Where's the, there we go, whoops. All right. Sorry. Clearly, I'm not the techie person
Maybe the
here.
battery is gone.
There. All right. So for those who do have access, this is another important part. A lot of people cannot purchase the speed that they need. So why does that matter? It's important depending on, it's important depending on what you're doing on the computer. I mean, you might think, well, why is it a big deal if you're just doing email? Well, nowadays, people are watching movies over the internet. They're playing games. And it takes more speed. But probably the most pressing thing is that the pandemic magnified was, maybe at night, somebody was doing a little bit of homework in your house and maybe mom or dad was checking emails. Now during the pandemic, suddenly 3 kids are home trying to do their schoolwork. Mom or dad's trying to work from home online, and they got a college student there who's trying to do schoolwork, and all of a sudden it's like, no way, everything was fine a couple months ago, and now it's not adequate, and I can't live my life like this. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing because of COVID. So certainly a change in their needs is something we clearly saw. However, this is interesting. Okay, neither one is working now.
What's that? This is our first meeting back in a year.
Yeah, just tell me when you want to flip it.
Okay. All right, okay. So this is interesting. For those who do have access, and the speed issue aside, it's interesting because they're not willing to pay more or much more for what could be significantly improved service. So this will be an interesting angle that will have to be looked at as next steps are taken. So that first bar right there, the purple one, people said, no, I'm not willing to pay any more. And then the next one is they're willing to pay 10% more, 25, 50, and then of course some people didn't know how much they were willing to pay. And probably some of it will be a function of how much improved service they could get. So this is, no.
This ain't working at all.
It should say value of access.
Why don't we go get some batteries?
I just
Okay,
switched it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just thought it would be interesting to just include a little bit about how people value their access. We asked people in the survey, is this particular thing very important, somewhat important, not important, neutral, or you don't know? So I just picked the ones where people said it was very important or somewhat important. So 95% of the people that responded out of these 1,300 said it was important, the access was important to stay in touch. 96% said it was important to stay informed. 84% said it was important to their quality of life. 63% said it was important to earn a living. And I believe that one is probably people who are talking about having to work from home. 57% said it was important to pursue an education. So that could have been college students, or it could have been kids having to do schoolwork from home. So for those who do not have access, we asked why didn't they have access? And so 73% said because it's just not available, and others thought it was too expensive. And then for those who do not have access, 60% did say that it causes a problem in their ability to work from home. Now, only 45% said it causes a problem doing schoolwork from home, but I do want to point out that of the total responses, 40% of the people said they don't have anyone in school. So it's not that only 45% of 1,300 people said it wasn't a problem. it was, you have to take that other figure into consideration there. So for those who don't have access, we asked how much they would be willing to pay for new or significantly improved. And, most people picked the lowest end of the scale, which would be $25 to $50 a month. And then some picked the second one, which would be $51 to $75 a month. So again, that will have to be part of the conversations moving forward as we seek to attract providers, to come to the area. Now I'm going to turn the discussion over to Dave Wolf, who's our telecommunications manager, who will talk about much more technical stuff.
Thanks, Lori. And I just wanted to mimic what Lori said. It's been we really enjoyed working in Lewis County. ECC Technology set out of the 40 or 50 of these that they've done across multiple states. Best results by far. And that's thanks to a lot, to Ryan and Brittany and Lori, Sandra, but also you guys. I know that they reached out and you guys also helped out with outreach and things. So we do appreciate that. And the other thing I've been impressed with is that the day after the results came in, Ryan and Cassandra called and said, okay, this is nice, but what are we going to do with it? How are we going to move this forward? We need to get this, we need to get the solutions in place. And so I was impressed, but also a little scared because they really are moving. So it's very, very interesting, and it's really good to work with. So, the purpose of the inventory was to gather real-time information about where broadband is and where it isn't. And I say real-time because there's a lot of public information out there. The FCC has some maps, but they tell you right in there that don't really count on these. They're not very accurate because it's old data. We have a 477 report that is 18 months old and says, don't count on this, particularly in New York State, where we've had 3 phases of the broadband grant program. And so there's been a lot of build out in the last, not as much, unfortunately, Lewis County as we would like to see. There's been a lot of build out over the last several years. And so a lot of that data is old. And so what we're going to talk about now is the inventory. Where is broadband available and in what forms is it available? And this information was gathered by people driving every single road in the county, except like in Loudon, because they already know that there's already broadband in the Loudonville core. But every other road in the county, they drove and visually inspected. Is there coax there? And if there is, are there drops going into homes? Is there fiber there? And if there is, are there fiber going into the homes and things like that? So
Even Osceola.
even in Osceola where there is some. So this is very up to date. We will need to keep it up to date. The good news is we do have people internally who can also do this work. So now that the base is covered, every 6 months or so, if we go out and do this on the roads that aren't covered, we can kind of pick up and continue to update this mapping software that we've developed as a tool. So this next slide just shows where grants. This is the New York State Broadband Program. These are the awards that have been given and are mostly complete. The blue is Frontier, and that's a fiber. They put fiber to the home in those areas. And you'll see it on a map further down where you'll see where the fiber is. And we overlaid it with those blue spots to make sure they really did do it, and they have. The green is Hughes Network. It's a satellite. Basically, whenever the state couldn't cover it with anybody else, they gave some money to Hughes to cover it. Most people don't consider that broadband, and as a matter of fact, most of the grant programs that are now becoming available, if you have only satellite, it's still considered unserved, and you can get a grant for that territory. So the blue is good, but the green we need to work.
Can I make a note, Dave?
Yes.
We hear the governor say a lot that New York State has 98% coverage. That's the map he's using.
Yeah.
HughesNet. Okay, so that's why what they're saying in Albany doesn't match with our experience on the ground, because the satellite we know is not quality.
And I would just add that while we visually inspected these and we see the build out, Cassandra did reach out to the PSC, or the Department of Public Service now they call themselves, and they actually said that Frontier has said they're done and they're in the audit phase now. They're going out and inspecting it too. So I know that they're mostly done, although we are having some issues with, yeah, the fiber's on my road, but they tell me they can't build it, can't come into my house. So we're gonna work on that with the Department of Public Service as well. So, then this map shows then a brand new federal grant program, the regional, it's actually rural, but Regional Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF. This is who got awarded in Lewis County. The blue is Frontier again. So the good news is they're covering more of that green area that the satellite is. The bad news is this is the federal government gives you 6 years to implement this program. So we don't know yet. One of our follow-up items will be to get with Frontier to say, can you give us a better plan? Because I don't think anybody wants to wait 6 years to get service. So that, we may have to think about what do we do in the interim. Is there some low-cost solutions we can do to kind of cover that, bridge that gap until this is built out? So those are things that we want to do. There is some money in there for SpaceX as well. It's kind of newer. So the inventory that we took, just so you know, this is a wired inventory that we did, because that's what you can see. So it includes any fiber cabling, any coaxial cabling, which is what Spectrum typically uses to do broadband to your home. They do use fiber too. They have fiber and coax all through their network. If they pick up the central offices and the remote terminals, it's probably not as critical, but that tells us where they can at least serve DSL from. So we like to look at that to see, and it tells us where they can do fiber to the home, some of those remote terminals. So it just gives us a little better idea of what they're doing, but not that critical. It included the wireline boundaries, and this, you'll see a slide in a minute, but it shows basically you're mostly Frontier with Verizon, that's in a little bit of the territory. But it just shows you who the incumbents are. We also picked up all of the wireless towers and any tower sites that are out there that they could see. There's some small ones, obviously, that they don't pick up, but any of the bigger cell type infrastructure is also mapped, because that's always useful to use existing towers as opposed to building new towers. So we wanted to collect those, and we've mapped also where the county has towers. And we may come back to this group at some point and say, are there any public safety towers that you may have that we could put smaller antennas on to get into a core area? We see a lot of them on fire departments and different areas that might be useful to put something in there if we need to develop a solution. So these are the tower sites in Lewis County, and if you have an inventory, or if you know of some in your towns that you'd like us to be aware of that aren't on this map, let us know. And if you have the heights, that would be really helpful to know about how high it is, and then we can find some folks do mapping. So that's the wireless towers. The next few slides, I'm going to talk about the other services, not wireless. Again, this survey that we did, there are some wireless internet providers here that cover a small part of, I think, up in Pinckney and some of those areas, and it doesn't count those, although we have received their coverage maps from them, just so that we can maybe add those to our mapping in the future. But this is everything else. So there is a variety of costs and speeds. This next one is what Lori referred to. This is the speed tests that were done. I think, unfortunately, only 37 actual results. 72 people did respond, but unfortunately 35 of them did the test, but still didn't know what their speed was after they did it. So we had 37 actual responses, which isn't a great sample size. But what's interesting is out of those, 35% of the people who did that test do not have what the FCC considers broadband service. There's a lot of DSL in Lewis County that only gets a couple megs, 5 megs, 7 megs tops. And that's why we see that 60% of people who have troubles working from home, and 45% of the kids who have troubles working from home. And it's something that is may need to be addressed. First, you want to make sure you cover the unserved, but you might want to think about, what about these other people who really they have service, but it's really not good enough for them to be able to do a lot of what they would like to do. And 46% of the people that responded said they can't get the speed that they really need. And like I said, if this is a trend, we may have to, look at that as well as this slide, the boundaries, just so you know, the yellow there is Verizon service territory, and the rest of it, in green or gray or whatever it looks like, is Frontier's territory, and that is the fiber that they have out in the network. So those green lines are the fiber. The yellow squares are the bigger yellow squares are where they have a central office, and the smaller ones are the remote terminals. The small green squares are the remote terminals. You can see Verizon and Frontier don't ever overlap, but other people could build in there and do this, but they won't overlap each other. This is the slide that shows Frontier's fiber, and the green areas is the New York State broadband. And so you can see pretty much they have fiber now covering the green areas that they were supposed to build fiber to. So it does look like they covered the majority of those areas. There's a few census blocks that don't look like they're covered, but there's no homes there, so they stop short. But other than that, it looks like they have built out, and that is the next slide shows Spectrum's network. Unfortunately, as you look, it's pretty much duplicates the Frontier network for the most part. They both kind of go down 12 and 26, and they don't spread out. They spread out, but not a ton from there. So they're very similar networks to the telephone companies. The next slide is a very busy slide, but it combines the towers, and it shows both the telephone company and Spectrum's infrastructure, and then it's color-coded by density. Each of those are census blocks that have a certain density, and you can see along the sides it goes from 110 in the area. Now, the density, though, the census blocks sometimes are very small, and so they might not have a lot of people, but sometimes they're very large, and they do cover that. So the next slide is really, shows now kind of what's remaining. If you take out what's been awarded in the RDOF funding and the New York State Broadband Grant funding, this is the rest of the HughesNet territory that has not been addressed today. It's unfortunately looks sizable, but it's also, hopefully we can do things to fix that. Like I said, we do want to get the wireless coverage maps, because I think that'll pick up a little bit of this, but not too much. And those are all still grant eligible, and maybe something that we want to look at. The next slide is really just shows you, just so you can see that they did break it down for us in your package. What was sent to you to see each town by town, and what the coverage is. I have never heard of King Street Wireless, so I don't know too much about them. The satellite, these are older satellite organizations that use the geosynchronous orbit, which just means they're very far away and there's a lot of latency issues. Not great for voice, not great for video conferencing, not too bad for downloading things, but most people find it to be too expensive, and there's data caps. So we don't count those as much, but you can see, like, in turn, Frontier is 87.5 and Charter is 79. So there's people there who are definitely not served. Same thing, West Leiden, 79%. This next slide is an example of just a screen capture of what we've built in GIS that we've provided to the county planners and stuff, so that they can look real time. And if you look at that, on the left, we didn't include any grant detail, but the white lines are broadband infrastructure. Somebody has something there. It's coax, it's fiber, there's something there. But you can look, and the reason I picked this one is we got calls from people on East Road, and you can see where all those pink dots, by the way, those are homes, or those are structures, actually. And as you zoom in, you can zoom right in and see what those structures are. And as you get closer in, we actually break it down by parcel, because sometimes if you have like a big garage detached or something, it looks like two homes, but it's not. It's one property. But it gives us a real quick idea of where all those pink dots that don't have a white line going right near it do not have broadband today. And so it gives us a really good idea of where people don't have service. And then the next question is, okay, but did someone get a recent grant? So the slide on the right is similar, but it shows us where there's been some RDOF funding. Now, obviously, that doesn't cover everybody in that area, but it does cover some. The RDOF funding, just like the state funding, is done by census block. And so this is Frontier in this case, well, the blue is SpaceX, satellite, newer satellite technology. But this, when we look at this, we know then what currently has not been spoken for and probably won't get service for the near term, unless the county does something to try to help foster.
Dave, before you lose track, can you back up to the last slide? So when you say charter, this is Town of Bregan, the top charter spectrum cable, 100% coverage. What does that 100% mean?
It means that they claim to have 100% of that town, that they have broadband available in 100% of the town.
Well, I would question that. Might be different, actually.
Well, one of the things that I would say is that this map that we have it by town. You can zoom right in, and we're happy to let, if anybody, I don't want to speak for you guys, but if you want to take them through it, or we would take you through it and say, let's zoom into your town and see what we really show. Let's see what the granting is, what grant funds have been made available, and let's look at what infrastructure really is there.
So we didn't want to get into, zooming around on the GIS to everybody's individual towns today, but whoever is interested in that, these guys have set up an amazing GIS portal, and you can go, zoom into any part of the county and see exactly, all the different layers. It would be probably not a good use of your time to do that on your own or without one of these guys, because there's a lot of data that is there, but we'd love to do that.
I didn't mean to drill down today, I just wanted to understand the presentation.
That's what they're saying, is that this is based on their driving and stuff. So we'd have to take a closer look at it, but this is what we've been provided in the report. We'll go to the next one, and then I think just the last one, I believe. So what we wanted to do in the end, we said, hey, we know what is served. Why don't we make a map of the streets that currently do not have, these are all the streets that currently do not have broadband infrastructure. So it looks pretty bad. When we overlay, I did not do this for this one, but when we overlay some of the newest grant funding, the RDOF funding, the gray, you can barely see it, but there is a little gray lines in there. That's the existing fiber infrastructure. But as you zoom in, you can really get to the detail and see how many people live on these streets and all that stuff. But this map is the streets that don't have any broadband infrastructure that aren't now. Quite a few people did respond saying they use Wi-Fi hotspots. So that's not what we're talking about here. We don't have mapping because we don't, Verizon Wireless and T-Mobile and AT&T aren't going to share their coverage maps with us. We have an idea of where they are, but how much coverage people really get, we don't know that. So that doesn't include that. But this is fiber, coax, or something that gives you broadband to your home that's wired. And I think, in summary, we're happy to have you take a look at this system. You can drill down, you can click on, there's lots of other publicly available information that's available that we can look at. And I think that this will really allow us to look at address by address, who's served and who's not served. And then we need to think about one of the things that didn't show up as much as I expected it to in this survey was affordability. When we talk to the school districts, because we do a lot of work with the school districts, when we talk to them, affordability seems to be a much bigger issue than what showed up in the survey. A lot of kids say they don't have internet, and when you look at it, they do have it available, but they don't have it because they can't afford it. So when we did our initial study with Jefferson Lewis BOCES, 85% of the people who said they don't have internet had it available. They just couldn't pay for it. So That's not 85% of students. It's just out of the, maybe in one school district, there's 60 or 70 kids that don't have it, but 85% did, and just couldn't pay for it. And then a couple of cases, we called the service providers and said, hey, can't you get these guys some service? They said, yeah, they used to have it, they didn't pay, so we cut them off. Things like that. So affordability is an issue, and the other thing that we might want to think about is those areas that have less than 25 megabits per second. That might be, not everywhere, but there might be some areas where it's a growing population and you're trying to attract people there. And if there's only DSL and it's slow, you might want to take a look at that. So that's the value of this tool. You can drill down and say, hey, let's really focus in this area and see what we want to do. So thank you again. Really a pleasure working with the county and appreciate it. Thank you.
So, next steps, that's what we kind of wanted to leave some time to talk about with the legislators. Our commitment at this point has been $30,000. The Development Authority has put in $30,000, and of course, all of our staff time. But if we're going to utilize this information to cover some of these gaps, then a commitment of a little more than $30,000 is going to be necessary. So there are lots of grant opportunities coming up. We did put a notice of intent to preserve a place in line for the Northern Border Regional Commission, which has grants coming out within the next couple months. So that's a potential source of funding. We also saw, was distributed to the legislators, Elise Stefanik has some member line item funding that could be available. And we also have Senator Gillibrand's office is pushing out a big rural broadband package through the USDA. We've been working closely with Sue Merrill, who lives right here in Loudville. We'll know for certain when that gets going, and we'll make sure to apply. But grants can only get us so far. So what I was hoping we could spend a little bit of time on before we start our meeting is, what do you guys want to do next, and what's the level of commitment from the legislators?
I guess I have one question. You and I talked about it before. And, there seems to be a lot of roads that has more than one group on it. And they've all run their own lines with their grants and stuff like this. I know you can't say this and that and tell them what to do, but a little bit more restriction, because it seems like if Frontier puts a line in, put it in big enough, Spectrum can buy some of those lines to get their stuff there, instead of 2 and 3 people running the same road for the same group. So is there something that we can kind of,
Like a local law that says one provider per road or something like that?
well, you're not trying to take away from anybody, because, correct me if I'm wrong, couldn't Spectrum buy some lines on fiber optic?
Yeah,
I know when you run a line down through before, the phone company is renting some of those.
So it's a great question. Unfortunately, the incumbent local exchange carriers, Verizon, Frontier, and then cable TV companies, Spectrum, they keep, like we do a lot with those guys. We swap fibers here and there, so they use our fibers to get certain places, and we use their fibers to get to certain places. They do that, but they don't ever enter into some sort of an agreement where we have something that I think is unique in the state, and it's because of our public authority. We'll do a revenue share. We'll tell people, you can use our fiber to build to the homes here. And because we've paid money for this infrastructure, we need to get some money back from you guys. You use it and give us a little bit of money back. But Spectrum only provides services, primarily where they build. And so does Verizon, and so does Frontier. And they're not gonna swap with a Spectrum. I would love to be able to see it now. Maybe times have changed because of everything that's going on. Maybe they would be willing to, but in the past,
It just seems like there's waste of money putting 2 or 3 lines back one road.
it is.
When you could put a little bit bigger line and everybody could have the fiber and pay in.
Yep.
And Because what they're doing is they're competing against each other, really.
And in most areas, it's very difficult to make a return if you only get half the customers, you know?
Right.
You would think they wouldn't want to do that, but
Okay, thank you.
So I'm intrigued by the wireless technology. We have, I don't know how many towers we have. So is it possible to do a study, ascertain how much of the county we could serve by putting wireless technology on the existing towers? And how much of the population could we serve by doing that? And what would it cost? Is there some way of
Yeah.
garnering that information and come up with?
to do a study like that will cost a little bit of money because somebody's they've got to do a lot of software programming, they've got to buy some data, but because the topographic information is available, but you also want what they call clutter, and that's, you have to pay for that. That's the tree heights, it gives you tree heights and tree types, and it gives you building heights and stuff so that you can see where the interference is. And then the other thing I would say is, yes, we could definitely do that, but I think you want to know what is the goal first, because wireless can go from very inexpensive antennas to very expensive antennas, and depending on how far you want to cover, depending on how many people you're going to serve. If you're only going to serve 20 or 30 people, better off going with the less expensive antennas. And I would say that besides the county-owned towers, that there are other towers that are available. Because most of the time, fire departments, those types of things are right in the center. We were looking at Fort Lyden the other day. There's, coax goes through the center of town, but none on the side street. You could pick up that whole area with one wireless antenna. But wireless, there's a whole bunch of questions you have to ask. But it's gotten much better. There's more spectrum available. And that spectrum used to be only purchased by the big guys. But they're making it available now. You can actually buy spectrum for your town for a lot less money than used to be. You had to spend hundreds of millions to get. Now you can pay Google a small fee for access to some spectrum. So there's different solutions.
So my guess is that the technology going forward is either going to be satellite-based or wireless. They're going to attempt to get away from wired technology because it's probably far more expensive to install. And as the technology grows in the wireless, for instance, I'm thinking that the cost of that would go down. But for now, I don't know if we can layer it somehow. This area has a population density of X. We need antenna Y, which costs whatever, $5,000, $10,000. It will adequately serve this area. Over here, we got more geography. It's rougher terrain. We have more or less people. We need a bigger antenna, but with whatever appropriate antenna, we could cover this in.
Yeah.
Is it possible that?
It is possible, and I think you'd want to come up with a few different solutions and decide. One of the things we've seen some municipalities do is they put in their own 4G/5G antennas with the goal of providing services until they can get a Verizon or somebody to come in, and then they'll lease part of that. So that's a potential. But
What's the cost of something like that, though?
yeah, so that's the issue is you can get a unlicensed frequency antenna for $1,000, and it will cover 2 miles. You can go with these LTE antennas, and they cost $70,000. But they provide a lot more bandwidth. They can serve a lot more people. When you talk about wireless, every time there's only so much spectrum available. So every time you add somebody, you have less bandwidth available for the next people and the next people. So you've got to match up you kind of got to match up how many people you're going to serve with the technology. And there are other technologies out there now that are very nice because they give you lots of bandwidth, but they only cover a couple of blocks, 500 feet each way, but they they talk to each other. So they don't have to all have fiber to them. One has fiber and then they can link up 10 or 12 of these things. And you can cover a pretty good area, and those are a couple thousand apiece, and you can get 400 or 500 megabits or a gigabit to the home.
So that's like Port Liden you're talking about,
Yeah,
something like that
Right in
situation.
that area, you might want those, and then you might want to have outside there one bigger antenna that reaches out further, that maybe doesn't get to the same bandwidth, but.
Maybe somehow some of the population is served by a hard wire that goes back to the antenna if they're close enough to.
It really isn't a one size fits all. Basically,
Right.
Looking at the maps, and we've spent a lot of time looking at the maps and looking at certain areas. You might have 100 homes that are unserved, and I guess one of the things we've talked to Dave about is there a way, one, if we've identified we have a critical mass, is there a way to get a service provider to come in if we invested some money to basically come in and provide internet, there might be a way the service provider, if they knew that there was 100 homes, to actually invest their own money, to actually meet with them to discuss that first. Number two is looking at grant options, but it is each community, and Dave's the expert, but each community is could be slightly different based on trees, based on the infrastructure, based on the number of businesses and or homes that might need to be served. If it's a farm or whatever, they might have greater capacity, greater needs, line of sight. And Dave has been looking at just all kinds of different wireless technology that is pretty fascinating what they can do. But one of the things is the useful life. If you invest in wireless, what is it, 5-10 year maybe useful life? Whereas fiber to the home, everybody wants fiber to the home, but it's the cost. And it's just not. Yes.
So I think this board wants to kick this off. So what we need is, how do we accomplish that? How do we move this forward?
So I always say, to me, the first thing that you want to do is say, what is our goal? Is it to make affordable broadband for people? Or is it to give them really good technology? Is it to balance those two where we might not be able to, some people say, look, I want to be able to, as a municipal network, provide $25 a month broadband. And they might get only 50 megs or so, but that's good for today. And we can upgrade it down the road if we need to, as more wireless technology becomes available. Other people say, I just want to cover the people who don't have it. I just want to get them served so that they can stay here longer, live, or do jobs or whatever they need to do.
It's from my perspective, I talked to Ryan about this a little bit, it's prioritizing. One thing is, and we all want to provide, all of Lewis County, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence County, every single home. And that's going to be tough to do in a year, in 2 years, 3 years. And it's looking at, we have all this detailed information now, and looking at the maps and saying, right here's a real easy win. And we could invest X amount of money, and maybe we could test out some of the wireless infrastructure, make a small investment, and roll it out, and prioritize and how you're going to roll it out. It's not like we would be able to wire up or wireless provide connectivity to all of Lewis County like that. It's going to take time, and plus the development authority. We're in the business of fiber. That's what we've always provided is fiber connectivity. Businesses, large capacity users. So the wireless piece of it is new to us, and we would also one thing that's very important to note is we still need a service provider to provide the service. The development authority, we don't provide internet. because we don't want to be in competition with the incumbents. It's one of the things that we always said we wouldn't do. So we would need a service provider to come in over the wireless. Working with staff, trying to identify what your folks' priorities are. There's going to be, we hope, a lot of grant money available, and we just need to be prepared to apply and know what we want to accomplish.
So if there was maybe a small group of legislators, because trying to dig into all this data with all 10 is gonna be difficult, but if we could do an ad hoc committee that could dig in a little bit deeper with some of this stuff, maybe that's a way to move forward. But, we've got a lot of information and we've got a lot of possibilities, but the devil's in the details, kind of like Carl was saying. And so there's not gonna be one size fits all, but the prioritization is gonna be difficult. I don't think it'd be fair for just staff to say, well, we're gonna invest in Denmark, because that's the easiest thing. I think the elected officials, you guys need to look at the data and weigh in about, priorities and where we should put that, those funds. So that's my opinion.
But whatever we invest in, who do we get to run this after you have the fiber there? That's what we run.
Well, you would hope.
We can run the fiber, and if we don't have anybody buy in and provide the service, what have we accomplished? So it's gotta be a combination of kind of everything.
Yes,
I mean, if we pick a place, we've gotta have somebody that's gonna
Yes,
run it
absolutely.
and use the service.
You'd hope if you gave somebody such an easy layup, where we put out, a lot of the capital costs in, all they gotta do is be the service provider and send bills and do home visits and that kind of thing. That'd be enticing for a company. Oh,
I agree, Ryan, that you will find a service, if you build it or we build some of the infrastructure, but someone else just does the billing, the collections, takes the phone call, you'll get somebody. We just did it in Tupper Lake. We had 4 people responded, and we're doing the same thing. We got a Northern Border Regional Commission grant. The town took ownership of this, but they don't want a manager to run it every day. So we did an RFI. We got 4 people to reply. They all had pretty good pricing. We're going to be able to keep the pricing of the service down to a decent level and still provide a good level of service. So there are people out there all around here, and we connect to almost all of them, and they will be willing to do it, and we can help you with that.
Listen, the authority is willing to work with you folks, and this is the first step, and now the real work begins, as far as just trying to, I think, key for you folks is prioritization, and that's the difficult part of where we start.
I would like to ask for grants. It's going to impact what grants are applicable to which areas. For instance, there's new CDBG CARES Act funding out there that'll only be applicable or eligible for LMI communities. So that automatically puts us to Fort Leyden, the town of Lionsdale, and Osceola. Now, after speaking with Dave yesterday, we narrowed down that we wouldn't need to apply for Osceola because it's according to our mapping served. But the benefits of putting wireless technology, because one of the components of that program is that it has to be done within 12 months. So a vast amount of fiber is out of the question. But there are ways that we could do a hybrid solution with wireless installations in Fort Leyden and in the town of Lionsdale to service a wide area of houses and residents, along with a combination of some fiber in there. So it's going to come down to priorities and grant funding. And we need to, there's 2 pots of funding out there, the CDBG CARES Act funding for this type of project. We're eligible for up to $1 million as a county to apply for those 2 LMI communities. And that's it, first come, first served basically until August. So it's important that we get the ball rolling on that. There's no match. I'm meeting with DANK and New York State OCR officials on Thursday or Friday to discuss more possibilities for that program. And then there's also the NVRC funding that Ryan had mentioned that we are eligible for, and we would be working with DANK on, because I believe DANK is an LDD, so that they would be helping with the administration on that. And we are eligible, again, for up to $1 million, but it requires a 20% match. So the project initially that we identified would be approximately $500,000 to serve immediate residents that do not have service. So we were looking at targeting a hybrid approach of broadband or of fiber and wireless as well for that one, but we're not limited to LMI communities, so it would be more in priority areas. But the county would have to agree to that 20% match, which in this case would be about $100,000. But I feel like there's two huge opportunities right there for approximately $1.1 million project that we have estimated that the county would only need to pay $100,000 for. So just giving everybody a kind of idea of how fast we're running with grants, and they're about to, some of these opportunities are slipping away, so.
Well, how fast can you get it done?
We've already sent in the letter of interest. You know,
I mean,
a
if we
couple
say-
extra people in my office would help too.
Say-
Yeah, plug in there.
Say the board said yes to it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You go forward.
Yep,
You
we
know,
can have those applications in that time, absolutely. We can have
because the sooner the better, right?
Yep, we can have everything in. The application for the NDRC grant is due May 14th, I believe. We can get that in, and then we can also.
We just don't want internet on the East Road.
Oh, that is actually one of the, I plugged you, Rox, I plugged it with Dan. That was the stretch.
Can the towns and villages get, can they be involved in the funding?
And we've discussed that too, is maybe there's a way that we can work with the towns and villages to utilize the stimulus funding that everybody has access to help pay for these costs. And absolutely down the road, the CDBG funds are only applicable to the county because we have LMI communities or those individual LMI communities. So being that we're already, on the fast train towards this funding and we have all the tools to do it, we figured we would work with Dan, and Michelle Cohen has already reached out and offered a willing hand on that.
So we have clearly enthusiasm.
Rox, did you want?
I just want to ask one question. Why do we have to spend money where it already is, but they won't access it? But Spectrum has service on the end of Deer River East Road, non-410, but they will not put it in between, and they will not consider the density. We've had 3 inspections, and everyone was done with, one was 99,000, that was mine. Mary Mysick's was 80,000, and Mrs. Yancey's was 50,000 coming from 410. They will not consider anybody in between, and then the other 3 that asked for an inspection was given you're in a red zone, no bill. There's 43 people, homes between those 2 spots, 4 miles.
4 miles, well, I'll tell you that almost every franchise agreement that I've seen that Spectrum has, they're not required to build when there's less than 20 homes per mile. So 40 homes in 4 miles doesn't beat that number, but I also know in that area that they have a capacity issue. They said, someone told me that they called, and they said, well, we can't do it because that we can get out of our system, we can't go any further. So there's always issues like that. But you make a good point. If some of what we talked about is maybe you sit down with them and say, hey, it's to go this 4 miles is gonna cost you 80,000. If we put a grant in and we get you 40,000, will you put the other 40 up and build it and take care of this? That might be the cheapest solution as opposed to putting in.
But there's also, I talked to Mike Williams, Public Service Commission, and there's such a thing as rural accessibility, which takes it down to 20 homes in a certain lane, not 40.
20 homes per mile is what it is.
Right, for rural access, where it's 40 or 45 in the normal. So we darn near fish some of the people into that, but they won't even consider it. I mean, I don't see why they should spend money building something that all they gotta do is hang it to the poles, all they're doing is run an A wire. There's nothing else to do.
Well, unfortunately,
And I understand that nobody can make them do anything, this is what my feeling said. There's something they go where they want to, and he's probably right.
And it does cost them about 20 to 30,000 miles.
And they have to pay a franchise to National Grid, or whoever they're hanging on,
Full attachment fee to National Grid, and you
Yeah.
have to pay taxes on their.
taxes to the town and county. And
So there is cost.
Mhm.
Our costs are about 30,000 per mile to build, others are a little less sometimes, but 25,000.
And why are they building in Bonaparte? I mean, I went on a back road 6 miles back, and I had to wait to go around them, and they're building a seasonal home on the backside of Bonaparte.
I think they got some grant.
Somebody lives there. They-
Well, I think they got grant. Because that was considered unserved before, and so it was available. It's harder than some of these others.
Yeah, I-
Because it's all around them. Those are the ones that are the worst.
Thanks for your time, guys.
So we've got two things going for us. We've got great information. We've got, I think, good enthusiasm from the board here. The third piece we need to put into place is some funding. We do have, we're gonna be talking over the next month about our stimulus funds. Maybe the board would consider segregating some of those funds right off the top that we could chip away. Not all at once, not over the next year, but over the next 5 years, chip away a little bit at this and try to solve some of these individual problems one at a time and see if we can match some of our funds with the grant funds to get the best bang for the buck. So maybe that's our next step, is we have a little discussion about, we're gonna have a big discussion about what to do with that $5 million that's coming our way from the stimulus. Maybe part of that could be segregated into a fund that can be used to move this along, so. Good.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.